Hi, students. So I hope you are all doing well and enjoying this class so far. This week, we talk about solitude and loneliness. And as many of you may not know, but there actually is a difference between loneliness and solitude, right? Loneliness is more of a like feeling state, okay? It's something that we are actually feeling physiologically and psychologically, right? And so when we feel loneliness, sometimes for many of us, this can actually feel um, kind of similar to a psychological pain almost. Whereas solitude is something that we actually choose for ourselves. It's a time for us to look inward and develop some growth and have some introspection and just a little bit of time alone into ourselves. So we can do this. Like I know people who do like silent retreats for like a week, and they go away, and maybe there are other people there, but they go away kind of on their own, and they have this weekend of solitude and silence to themselves. I personally have taken solitude in like nature and gone like backpacking, gone camping, um, just trying to connect more with myself, and that's solitude. And then loneliness, again, is that feeling, that experience that we have when we're alone, and yet we don't want to be alone. Okay, there's still this like yearning to actually be around other people or to have more satisfying relationships. Okay, I'll give you an example or a story. Let me tell you a story. So I, at one time, was working on becoming more comfortable with that feeling of loneliness. And I had been working on just basically using exposure therapy, and just being alone versus trying to fill the time with something. And I wasn't really choosing to be alone necessarily, but it was like in that loneliness where I wanted to hang out with people and they weren't hanging out, or in that moment where I wanted more satisfying relationships and I wasn't really experiencing that. But I was trying to help myself to build a better, like almost resistance and comfortableness with loneliness. Okay. So fascinating thing. So during this experience of trying to become more comfortable with my own like being alone and loneliness, I actually had 2 season tickets to this the Ontario Reign hockey team. Okay. And I had these tickets and I wanted to go and I wanted someone to come with me. And so I'm like contacting my friends and they're all telling me they're busy. I waited till the last minute almost to potentially create this scenario for myself. So I'm contacting them. They're telling me they can't go. I hit up everybody I could, but nobody was able to go. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to go on my own. I'm trying to work with this comfortableness of loneliness. I'm going to go. So I go and I go and sit down in my seats and I'm like, okay, there are some people around me. There's some people behind me. There's some people in like my row. There's some people in front of me. So I think like, okay, there's people still around me. I'll be all right. That's what I'm thinking. Right. And then right before the game starts, like people behind me leave and the people in my row leave. I was like, what is happening? Right. So I'm sitting there pretty much all by myself, getting ready to watch this game. And at first I was so focused on like this experience of nobody wanting to go. And then there's nobody new around me to like talk to or hang out with, or, and enjoy and share this game. And for the first like period, I was so focused on what was happening. And then I was able to use some cognitive behavioral techniques. I was able to get myself out of that mindset. And then something very interesting happened. Like as I started to focus more on the game and the experience and everything happening, it was one of the best games I had ever been to. Yes, I wish there was somebody there that was hanging out with me and sharing that moment with me, but at the same time, I was still able to be comfortable in the fact that it was just me enjoying what I was doing. Okay. And that was something that really helped me become more comfortable with loneliness. Now, there is a lot of value in solitude. Okay. Solitude, as I said, is typically something that we choose for ourselves, right? We take this time to be with ourselves, to discover who we are. Now, some people find this like uncomfortable because once their brain starts running with thoughts, they have a challenging time managing those thoughts. And so they don't want to have this ruminating brain and sit with their thoughts. So often some people find solitude uncomfortable. So, and one thing that I tell them is solitude is good, and we have to learn how to manage those thoughts more effectively in order to enjoy the solitude, because it does provide this opportunity for like this renewal of ourself, right? Well, we're able to like examine our lives. We're able to start to gain a better sense of perspective about things happening around us. We're able to like sit down and think about our goals better. um, when I did a lot more goal setting in my life, something I really like to do is like on New Year's Day, I would actually go on a hike, and then I would take a pen and paper in my backpack with my water and everything. And then I would reach a point in the hike where I sit down and I would engage in solitude and start thinking about what are the goals I want for this year? What do I want to see? What do I want to accomplish this year? And I would sit down and write out my goals using that SMART goal formula. Okay. And that was very helpful for me personally. Um, so it is good of us to actually take time away from our busy schedules, our busy lives, like all of the relationships and the roles that we have to take on, and just take a minute, take a beat, and just be with ourselves a little bit. Now, the experience of loneliness, because we do experience loneliness, it does happen. And as I said, it is a feeling that occurs. Okay. And often it occurs as a result from like certain events in life, such as like a death of a loved one, um, the decision for someone to potentially leave us, like a friendship to dissolve, or a romantic relationship to dissolve. Um, Job changes, or losing a job, or leaving a job, or moving to a new city, or um, if you're living with your family and then leaving your family, like there's a potential feeling of loneliness. Or um, living with like roommates, and then let's say you live with these roommates for like years, and then you all go your separate ways and move away. Like there is a experience of loneliness that can come from this. Okay. And it's this feeling that we are like set apart from others that we want to be connected to. Okay. So, and there are multiple different types of loneliness that we can experience, and the book details these very well, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about them. So, there's transcendent loneliness, which are going to be brief feelings of loneliness when there's a disruption in our like social network. Okay. But it's brief and it goes away. Chronic loneliness is another type. And that's when people are unable to establish like meaningful interpersonal relationships over a long period of time. Like they just are having trouble establishing these relationships, whether it's like friendships or whether it's romantic relationships, they're having trouble with it. And so the individuals can start to experience this chronic loneliness. Then there's everyday loneliness. The book talks about this as the pain of being isolated from other people, which may be related to fears of like intimacy, fears of rejection, fears of shame, being unloved, not worthy, right? Some of these cognitive distortions that we experience. And then there's existential loneliness. And this one is a profound sense of an unbridgeable gap that separates us from others. Okay. This is often related to our awareness that each of us inhabits a world fully known only to ourselves, right? And this is very much like a heady way of looking at loneliness. It's an existential loneliness. Okay, it's, if you're not familiar with the philosophy of existentialism, like check it out. But is a very interesting philosophy. And something about loneliness is, in 2020, with the whole like pandemic and forced isolation, many of us experienced a great deal of loneliness. Okay, now some people maybe had people around them, like within their family, but they couldn't see like friends or anyone outside of that home. And some people had to go through 2020 like on their own. And there was a lot of loneliness, and loneliness can have an effect on us. It absolutely can. So it creates like that psychological, physiological pain within us when we are by ourselves and alone. And even though we were experiencing this loneliness during 2020, we still had this certain level of connectivity, right? This connection through like technology, but it never really felt the same, did it? Zoom meetings and meeting up with friends on like, online. And I think even Netflix started doing things like watch parties where like you all get together and watch the same movie, but obviously in different homes. And it's a way for us to interact, but it does affect, like, it still isn't the same, right? So like social media reduces the influence of geography on structuring opportunities for social interactions, and it lessens our face-to-face time. Often with social media, there's like more pressure to have all these like online friends and get these likes and and showcase to the world what are all the wonderful, amazing things happening in our life. And in fact, like researchers conducted a meta-analysis trying to answer the question, like, does Facebook make you lonely? Right? And they actually found that loneliness, which is predicted by low social support and shyness, significantly increased with Facebook use. Right? And there was this difference within this meta-analysis that was observed that those who were lonely and those who felt connected, the difference was what they were looking at on Facebook. And often we may think like, oh, well, I have more contact with more people, so I'm okay, I'm building friendships, I'm doing, but we're really not honestly like connecting with each other. And again, we felt this during the 2020 pandemic. We may be reaching out to loved ones through Skype and through FaceTime and through Facebook and Instagram and whatever it is we're using. But at the same time, like we were still experiencing, like many of us were still experiencing this deep loneliness. And I think of Bo Burnham and his videos that he did called Inside, and his whole experience of just being by himself alone. And I have friends who lived alone who just, when things started opening up more and we could actually see each other, they just talked about how lonely they felt and how good it just felt to be able to like hang out with somebody face to face. So it's very interesting. Now, often we try to escape loneliness. Okay, many individuals who don't like that feeling of loneliness, we try to find ways to escape. This could be from living like a very busy life with a lot of distractions. This could be trying to surround ourselves with as many people as we can, or going out as much as we can to avoid that experience of loneliness. This could be somebody numbing that feeling of loneliness through alcohol or drugs. Could be taking on a lot of responsibilities. Again, just these distractions. Individuals it could turn into like an eating disorder. or overeating in order to kind of feel something. Uh, this could be spending hours on social media, binging, long episodes and seasons on Netflix, right? Playing video games, using technology to try to just get away from that feeling. Okay. But learning to confront the fears of loneliness are important. Okay. Loneliness influences both our physical health and our psychological well being. And experiencing extreme loneliness can increase an older adult's chances of premature death. Okay. So we need to actually learn to kind of confront our fear of this loneliness. And as I talked about with the story, that I was confronting my own fears of loneliness, right? Because silence forces us to reflect and touch deep parts of ourselves. And it is good for us to go through that. Okay. Now, for some, it needs to be done under professional care and professional help in order to get started with that. Okay. And moving through that, getting in touch with our deep parts of ourselves. But it really is important for us to actually do this, because loneliness leads to a lot, that experience of loneliness can lead to a lot of issues. In fact, if you remember, the assessment that I gave you, the relationship inventory assessment that I gave you when we talked about relationships, all of that was actually created for individuals that are experiencing loneliness. And they're experiencing loneliness because maybe they want a romantic relationship and it's not happening, or they want better friendships and it's not happening. So they're experiencing this loneliness. So that assessment is actually a good way for people to take a look at some of the attitudes that they have about relationships that might be in their way of forming these good relationships, because we want to have these strong relationships with people, and we also need to have it with ourselves in order to really experience life to its fullest, and to have one of a most effective life. We need to be able to do these things. So loneliness does occur through life stages, okay, such as childhood. Loneliness is an inevitable part of life beginning in childhood. It's just there. All right. And in fact, when people start to relive childhood experiences of loneliness as adults, they start to relive it. They can start to come to grips with their fears about being alone or lonely. Okay. And this is one way that we can start to confront our fears of loneliness. And then as we moved into adolescence, we had all these bodily changes. We're trying to figure out our identity, right? We have this higher need to be accepted by peers and liked. Okay. But unfortunately, it can create a lot of feelings of loneliness, because often as adolescents, often we start to think that we are alone and we are by ourselves, and we're dealing with all of this separate from everybody else. When we're really not, right? So, and in fact, the price of nonconformity during adolescence can be very steep for the individual, because they may start to feel very alone in the world if they don't try to fit in somewhere, right? Conformity does have its benefits, because we want to feel that we belong in something, even if it's just a really small little group, maybe 3 people or something. We want to have this sense of belonging. Some people's sense of belonging is stronger than others, but we still have this drive to be connected to something, right? Then we move into young adulthood, right? And then young adults come to terms with their own aloneness. It is going to affect how they make their choices. Okay. So if they don't come to terms with this experience of loneliness or being alone, it may actually affect them negatively. And this is like if we go to Erik Erikson's stages of intimacy versus isolation. Okay. If the individual is not able to form these relationships, or at least a relationship with somebody that creates the intimacy, according to Erik Erikson, that means they end up on the isolation side. Isolation often tends to be connected to loneliness, okay, and fears of intimacy, fears of, those cognitive distortions I listed earlier. So then we move into middle age. And when in middle age, oftentimes, right, when someone is feeling dissatisfied with their career or their life choices, it can exacerbate loneliness. And so sometimes changes at midlife, like empty nest where the children leave, can lead to feelings of emptiness and loss, which can lead to loneliness as well. And sometimes we see these like job changes occurring in midlife due to one's dissatisfaction. Sometimes as children are leaving the nest, like there's a chance for the people to start connecting, making these connections again in other relationships. Okay. And then in later years, we may start to feel more lonely because as we get older and our body starts to not be as young, right? Not be as vital as we once were, then we may start to experience this feeling of like not being valued within our society, not being valued within our family. And that can lead to loneliness as well. We start like losing certain senses, like hearing, right? And as hearing goes out and we can't hear what other people are saying, and that does create a lot of loneliness. So now, loneliness does not have to be overcome. And solitude is not something to avoid, right? Sometimes we get so busy attending to like day-to-day routines that we forget to reflect and provide ourselves with spiritual and emotional nourishment, all right? Making time for ourselves is a basic part of our self-care. It helps us to deal with stress better. It helps us to move forward. It helps in life. It helps us to adapt to changes better. Okay. It just helps us overall, psychologically and physiologically, to have time for ourselves, have that solitude. Okay. So, and in many cultures, it is very important to have some time of solitude with oneself. Okay. Reconnecting with ourselves can be very helpful. So, and I get the experience of being fearful of being alone or loneliness. And trust me, I'm not saying that we can get rid of loneliness, because we cannot. Like, it's going to occur when we have a loss in our life or something occurs in our life. We're going to experience loneliness. Okay. The idea is to try to get a little more comfortable and kind of face some of those fears of loneliness, and to actually try to experience some solitude from time to time. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I look forward to any comments that you may leave and your discussion post for this week. Thank you.